After the Charlie Kirk assassination, this video went viral calling on President Trump to bring back the Smith-Mundt Act, which would prohibit media outlets from peddling lies to the American public, but critics say would actually be an attack on free speech. In reality, both claims are wrong. Many on the right argue that Charlie's murder and the rise in recent political violence in general are largely because of the rhetoric and strong labels being weaponized against conservatives like fascist, racist, transphobe, and so on, which understandably made a lot of people want to call for more accountability in the media. That led to this video going viral calling on President Trump to bring back the Smith-Mundt Act, which he even reposted on his Truth Social account. Here's that viral video.
Alrighty, this message is for President Trump and his administration. President Trump, as a supporter who voted for you 3 times, I am hoping and praying that you will revisit what Barack Obama and Joe Biden got rid of back in 2013, which is the Smith-Mundt Act, which held news corporations accountable for lying to the American people and spreading propaganda instead of truth. I think instead of bringing it back as a Smith-Mundt Act, you name it the Charlie Kirk Act, you make it a law, and you make it damn near impossible for these people to continue to lie to the American public, which has brought chaos, hatred, division, and anarchy all across this country. Fines out the ass, which will damn near bankrupt their company should they lie to the American people ever again. They can have their opinions, that's fine. They need to state that it is their opinion and that it is not a fact. Because of their constant lies, a man lost his life over it. Because of the constant hateful rhetoric of calling him a fascist and a Nazi and a white supremacist and a bigot, the same thing that they called you, this man is dead. I think this would be a great legacy for him to have a law named after him, to force journalists to finally start telling the truth and having the integrity that they have lacked for over a decade.
Now, across the political spectrum, and particularly among progressives, there's anxiety that expanding government control over media content could be a slippery slope, increasing the risk of censorship. Both of those perspectives are compelling, but each are a bit misleading. There's a ton of conflicting information about this floating around online, and most of it is being reduced to partisan and culture wars. But to really understand it, it requires a little more nuance and context. Because when Obama amended the Smith-Mundt Act in 2013, the effects reached far beyond the news cycle and have essentially reshaped how information moves in America, in media and academia and even in politics. So if the Smith-Mundt Act was brought back and renamed the Charlie Kirk Act, would that ultimately lead to more censorship and less free speech? Or would it finally prevent our news media from spreading lies and misrepresentations? To answer that, you first have to understand what the Smith-Mundt Act did in the first place. Right after World War II, America had a problem. The Soviet Union was flooding Europe with propaganda, broadcast posters, stories, shaping who was good and who was evil. And the U.S. saw it as an existential narrative war and needed a counter move. So in 1948, Congress passed the Smith-Mundt Act, funding government-run media to shape opinion abroad, not just to sell the American dream, but to run narratives that served U.S. strategic goals. Now, here's how this is relevant to Americans. In 1972, the law was given a built-in firewall. It explicitly banned American propaganda meant for abroad from being distributed within the United States. In 2013, President Obama amended the act and removed the firewall. Now, you might be thinking, so what? How could that change anything here, especially if it was propaganda made for foreigners? But to that, I would say Mike Benz, former U.S. State Department official, puts forth a pretty interesting perspective on how insidious those effects might have been. Check it out.
With the Smith-Mundt Act.
Is that the 2011, 2012 thing where Obama allowed people to use propaganda against United States citizens?
Yeah, that was what was done then under Obama was the effective repeal of it. It was called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. But the modernization got rid of the whole purpose of it, the firewall, because at the time, the media and media control was seen as the linchpin crux of winning the Cold War, piping in pro-U.S. Media influence. So we had to win elections, and we had to influence the passage of laws in foreign countries by having an apparatus inside those countries that influenced the hearts and minds of people, which influenced who they voted for, which then determined the government. So you had to move towards political vassalage rather than military occupation. And what the Smith-Mundt Act did is, simultaneous with the creation of this in 1948, Congress recognized the Frankensteinian monster they were creating by authorizing a covert, permanent Department of Dirty Tricks, and this is their phrase, not mine, to do this cloak and dagger, to infiltrate and co-opt the universities, the unions, the media, the politicians, the judges, the whole swarm army, what I have been calling for a long time the USAID Truman Show, because it's, these people in these foreign countries have no idea, how many of the things they interact with that are effectively a movie set being constructed by the U.S. State Department and its sister influence orgs. But the point that I'm getting at here is the Smith-Mundt Act in 1948 said, okay, you guys can do this. State Department can do this. CIA can do this. You can plant fake news stories in France. You can, have propaganda blare into Africa or Western Europe or Central Asia, but that can't come home. You can't psyop our own people with your propaganda organ abroad. It's not just propaganda. The blob, our foreign policy establishment, can fund groups that effectively work with prosecutors domestically, or that work at media, dual use. We give them foreign grants to do media propaganda abroad, but they operate here. Or social media censorship, to coerce foreign countries to pass foreign censorship laws that explicitly and are intended to attack U.S. social media companies and in U.S. peer-to-peer speech. So we need that protection. If we're going to keep this function at all, we need a hard firewall and absolute grotesque penalties for any violation.
As you can see, after this, the influence seeped into all corners of our society. After 2013, government content meant for foreign audiences became easier to pool into newsrooms and classrooms, whether directly or by way of think tanks and reports, which helped blur the line between government messaging and what many assumed was independent coverage. But let me circle back to where we are right now. Some are saying bringing this back into law will prevent our news media from lying and misrepresenting, and others are fearing it could lead to more censorship. But here's the reality. Those calling for the Smith-Mundt Act to come back think it will finally stop the media from lying. That's unfortunately false, because the First Amendment protects freedom of the press and freedom of speech, which gives private media outlets like CNN, New York Times, ABC News, and so on the right to spin, distort, and even lie, with few but distinct exceptions. And for anyone that might fear it would unleash censorship, would also be wrong, because the First Amendment is still the guardrail. Putting the firewall back wouldn't suddenly give the government new powers to silence journalists. What it would do is shut down the opening created in 2013, which allowed government-backed narratives more room to filter into classrooms, newsrooms, and think tanks, where they were often treated as consensus truth. So this isn't about silencing the press, and it isn't about saving the press, at least not entirely, but it is about whether the U.S. government still gets to seed its own narratives into our information ecosystem. Lying in the media is not new, but I do have a theory as to why it's gotten worse and what we can do about it. In 2016, MAGA and the populist movement disrupted the consensus, and the media began defending the system more aggressively than ever, which is why I think the attacks have gotten way more intense in the last 10 years. This is why I find the idea of bringing back the Smith-Mundt Act as the Charlie Kirk Act possibly a step in the right direction. Reinstating the firewall could slow down government propaganda from being laundered back into our media and academia and used as credible sources. This could be a positive change, but there's still social media and the internet, which means the propaganda can still circulate in our feeds anyway, especially if we're locked in an echo chamber that feeds us way more of what we already believe, which is why the responsibility ultimately is ours. We should build the muscle of doing our own research, of questioning our own bias, of going to primary sources, of thinking critically and not just following the crowd, and actively shaking up our algorithms by watching and reading content from all sides of the political spectrum. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, refuse the urge to hold on to blind allegiance to any one party. Blind allegiance is the opposite of having your eyes open. Until next time, stay curious and stay grounded. Thanks for watching. If you liked that video, check out this video next. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel. I drop a new video every week.